So the White House today announced they were going to be doing some investing in sequencing, more than 6 million coming here to North Carolina. Why is this an important investment to be making?
Right. Well, you can hardly look at any news source these days without hearing about the variants. And the only way we can learn about how those variants are spreading and when new ones are emerging is if we sequence the viral genome. And so this is really going to be important for surveillance and monitoring how the virus is changing over time and how it's spreading, how these variants are spreading through populations.
And $6 million sounds like a lot in everyday life, but does that get us a lot when it comes to this kind of work?
So the $6 million is going to be not just the assay itself to learn the sequence, but the interpretation, the integration with record keeping and all the tracking that goes on with this, the sample collections. So it does sound like a lot of money, but the PCR testing that's going on currently is that the assays are roughly speaking of the same magnitude. So if someone gets a PCR test, we could do a genome sequence for around the same amount of money at a large scale. So yes, it's a lot of money, but think about all the PCR testing that's happening every day in North Carolina. It's on that where it's lots of money. So
Yeah. So it has the ability to maybe go a little bit more quickly than we'd like.
yes, yes, it does. Yes, it's a big number, but healthcare is a big number.
And then I guess when it comes to the work you guys are doing there at Duke, give me a little bit of an update on how your sequencing there is doing for your lab samples.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The last time we spoke, we hadn't seen any of these variants. Just a very few of them starting to come onto campus. That's actually why we spoke last time. And now we see that in the student population, that the California variant came in. It spread really rapidly. Then the UK variant started to show up, and now it's eclipsing the California variant, and we have New York coming in. So we've really seen this kind of ebb and flow of the different variants as new ones come in and replace the prior ones. And the way we can see that is by looking every week at the student population and sequencing all the positive samples. And so it's this kind of surveillance that lets us kind of keep our finger on the pulse of how that viral genome is changing over time, and that's it's not like it's going to happen once and oh we go from normal to UK variant and then we're done. There are going to be new variants arising constantly, so this is just sort of the new normal.
And I guess you can take that concept in the larger sense of the whole country or the whole state, right? How you're kind of using it as a pulse to see what's happening in the student population. That's probably why this funding is now important too, so we can see what's happening in the larger scope of the country spread, right?
Absolutely, Judith. And it's not like we don't have to test everybody, but we have to test enough people that we have a sense of what the general trends are. And what we don't want to do is have any population kind of be left out of this, right? So we need to test people in urban areas, people in rural areas, people in Western North Carolina, people in Eastern North Carolina. So it's a sampling. It doesn't have to be comprehensive, but we do want to be able to have a sense of when these variants are arriving and maybe where most of the transmission's happening.
And how much sequencing are you doing now at your lab?
So we're doing all of the positive cases that come from the campus community. We're also partnering with the clinical laboratories, and we're doing a subset of their samples. I think most of the current positives, and then they're actually going back into their archive, and we're doing some of the earlier ones from the beginning of the pandemic. And the idea there is to put together again a timeline so we have a better sense of the pace at which these replacements happen when the new strains arise. But
That'll be
to answer your question, it's a couple hundred samples a week usually. Sorry, yeah.
No, that'll be kind of neat too if you're getting some of those earlier samples to see really when these variants started picking up speed or becoming an issue. I don't think anyone's doing that yet.
Well, not in North Carolina that I'm aware of. It certainly could be. There are certainly other places in the world that are doing that. But I think this will be the first time we're really getting a time resolved view of how this is changing. And as I said, I wish that this were sort of a one-time thing and we could just sort of look once, get a sense of where things are, and then act accordingly. But the landscape will unfortunately likely continue to change.
Yeah. And then you said we don't have to test all samples, but what is a percentage that you think would give us a better idea of what the variant spread really is?
So I'm not an epidemiologist by training. I'm more the person who does the lab side of things, but it wouldn't be anywhere close to probably even 10% of the population. What's more important is to make sure that that sample is representative very broadly of the North Carolina population at large. And again, that means geographically dispersed in rural versus urban, people in different professions, that where you might imagine there would be differences in how readily transmission happens. Someone, a primary care provider in a clinic is going to be more at risk of exposure, for instance, than a farmer, just because of the number of people they come in contact with and so forth. So we can't let one of those be representative of the other. And so that's the kind of consideration in thinking about how to test.
Perfect. Anything I didn't touch on that you think is important to share or say about the importance of sequencing or variants or your lab work?
Yeah, I think the one last thing I would say is that this sequencing is going to be really important for us to understand for the people who have been immunized. Some of the variants, it's possible, will what we call escape the immunity that comes with that vaccination, and so we'd really like to know more about that. And until we do these kinds of projects, we really won't know whether if you got, say, Johnson and Johnson or Pfizer or Moderna, and a new variant shows up, do you need to go back and get another vaccine or are you fine? So there's a really practical advantage, not just a broad scientific medical understanding, but for individual North Carolinians, this could be a really important part of their healthcare moving forward.
And not just to know if the variants are here, but to know if that means something different for your vaccine or your course of treatment or prevention tools and that sort of thing.
Precisely.